A man watches from his window. He's been watching for weeks now, counting, waiting. And today, everyone who ignored his warnings is about to learn that Thomas Lyons doesn't make empty threats. For most people, buying a first home is a milestone. For Thomas Lyons, it was something closer to a promise kept. The property was everything he and his wife had envisioned, a three-bedroom house with a generous yard, the kind of space where their children could run freely and where his wife could finally plant the garden she'd been sketching in notebooks for years. But for Thomas, one detail stood above the rest: the front lawn. It stretched wide and green, framing the house like something out of a magazine. Thomas saw himself out there on weekends, mowing in clean lines, edging the borders, building something he could take pride in every time he pulled into the driveway. This wasn't vanity. This was ownership. Roots. A piece of the world that finally belonged to him. What Thomas didn't know yet was that the people in this town had already decided his lawn belonged to them, too. It started small. A few weeks after moving in, Thomas noticed footprints cutting diagonally across the grass, faint trails where the blades bent differently, pressed down by shoes that had no business being there. Then he saw it happen in real time. A shortcut. Someone had decided that walking around the sidewalk was too inconvenient, so they carved a path straight through his property instead. Thomas assumed it was an isolated incident. It wasn't. The next morning, he watched a group of middle schoolers do the same thing. Then a jogger. Then a woman pushing a stroller, her wheels leaving thin grooves in the soil. His house, it turned out, sat along a route between a residential block and a nearby school. And for years, possibly decades, locals had treated this corner lot as public throughway. Except it wasn't public. It was his. At first, Thomas tried to rationalize it. Kids being kids. People in a hurry. No real harm done. But the math didn't lie. The damage was adding up, one footstep at a time. Thomas needed data, not assumptions, proof. He installed a camera facing the front yard and let it run for 24 hours. Then he reviewed the footage. The results were staggering. In a single day, 30 pedestrians crossed his lawn on foot. 8 cyclists rode directly over the grass. 2 parents pushed strollers across the property. And then there was the dirt bike. Someone had ridden a dirt bike across his yard. Not once. Not by accident. The tire tracks told the story. A deliberate cut through the corner, leaving torn sod and exposed earth in its wake. The damage was no longer theoretical. One entire section of Thomas's front lawn, the side closest to the sidewalk, had gone completely bare. The grass was dead. The soil was compacted. What had once been a lush green carpet was now a dirt path, carved by hundreds of feet that had no right to be there. Thomas had built his dream, and strangers were trampling it into dust. Before resorting to anything drastic, Thomas did what most reasonable people would do. He asked nicely. He stood on his porch and waved down pedestrians. He printed a small sign and staked it near the sidewalk. He personally spoke to a few of the repeat offenders, students he recognized from the school route, neighbors who should have known better. "Hey, I'd really appreciate it if you could stick to the sidewalk. The lawn's getting torn up." The response? They ignored him. Not all of them, but enough. The foot traffic didn't slow. The cyclists didn't reroute. The dirt path only grew wider. Thomas consulted with friends. The obvious solution was a fence, a physical barrier that would eliminate the problem entirely. But fencing wasn't simple. The permits, the materials, the labor, it would cost thousands of dollars and weeks of bureaucratic paperwork with the town zoning office. For a first-time homeowner already stretched thin, it wasn't a realistic option. Thomas needed something else, something cheaper, something clever. And as he sat by his window, watching yet another stranger cut across his property without a second thought, he began to formulate a plan. Thomas didn't act immediately. He waited, observed, studied the patterns. He noted the peak hours, early morning school traffic, late afternoon returns. He mapped the most common entry points. He he calculated the angles. Then, quietly, he got to work. The first component was a motion-activated sensor, positioned to detect movement across the lawn's most heavily trafficked zone. When triggered, it would activate an alarm, a sharp, sudden burst of sound designed to startle. But the alarm wasn't the real deterrent. The second component was the sprinkler system. Thomas had it reconfigured. Pressure increased, coverage expanded, activation tied directly to the motion sensor. The moment someone stepped onto his lawn, they wouldn't just hear a warning, they would be drenched. With his camera still recording, Thomas sat back and waited. He didn't have to wait long. 7:14 a.m., the first trespasser of the day appeared at the edge of Thomas's property. A woman, mid-30s, walking briskly with a coffee cup in hand. She didn't glance at the house, didn't hesitate. She stepped onto the lawn like she had 100 times before. 3 steps in, the sensor triggered. The sprinklers erupted. Jets of cold water arced across the lawn in overlapping streams, catching her mid-stride. She screamed, not in pain but in shock, and scrambled toward the sidewalk, her coffee abandoned, her clothes soaked through. Thomas watched from his window. He was smiling. Over the next several hours, the trap claimed more victims. A group of middle school girls, walking in a tight cluster, triggered the sensors near the property's edge. The sprinklers caught them before they could react. They ran shrieking toward the street, backpacks bouncing, phones clutched to their chests. Thomas had been meticulous. The sprinkler coverage extended from the lawn's edge all the way to his driveway. There was no safe path, no dry escape route. If you stepped on his grass, you were getting wet, and he captured every second of it. Thomas uploaded the footage to TikTok. The videos spread quickly. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The internet had found its newest folk hero, or its newest villain, depending on who you asked. Supporters flooded the comments. "It's not one person, it's dozens every day. Do you know how much it costs to fix a destroyed lawn?" People could literally just walk 5 extra feet on the sidewalk. Zero sympathy. When someone trespasses on your property, they can sue you if they get hurt. He has every right to keep them off. But not everyone agreed. "It's just people walking. Relax." When you're running to catch a bus, every second matters. Your lawn isn't that important. Thomas responded directly to that one. "Then leave 5 minutes earlier. There's a sidewalk 5 feet away. Use it." One clip drew particular attention. In the footage, a teenage boy triggers the sprinklers, and instead of running, he turns toward the camera. He's soaked. Water drips from his hair. He raises his middle finger directly at the lens. The gesture was defiant, almost theatrical, as if he knew he was being recorded and didn't care. But it raised a question the comments couldn't stop debating. If he knew someone was watching, why did he cross the lawn in the first place? The answer most likely was simple. He didn't think there would be consequences. He was wrong. In the weeks that followed, something changed. The foot traffic slowed. The cyclists found other routes. The dirt bikers disappeared entirely. Thomas's lawn, once a casualty of public indifference, began to recover. New grass filled in the bare patches. The soil settled. The property started to look once again like the home he had dreamed of owning. Thomas hadn't built a fence. He hadn't filed complaints or hired lawyers. He had simply made trespassing inconvenient, and in doing so, he had won. Not everyone approved of his methods. Some called it petty. Others warned of liability. What if someone slipped? What if a startled pedestrian had a medical episode? Those were valid concerns. Thomas had gambled, and the gamble had paid off. But perhaps the real lesson was simpler than any legal debate. Thomas Lyons had asked politely. He had been ignored, so he stopped asking. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's exactly what it takes. The corner cutters learned their lesson. And Thomas Lyons? He's still watching.